The locomotive's whistle shrieked across the desert, a lonesome wail that matched the ache in Eleanor Hartley's chest. She pressed her forehead against the cool window glass, watching the red earth blur past in endless waves. New Mexico territory stretched before her like a vast, unforgiving sea of dust and sage. Mail-order brides. A woman behind her whispered, not quite soft enough. Poor creatures, selling themselves to strangers for a meal ticket. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the letter in her lap. The ink had smudged from her sweating palms, but she knew every word by heart. Jonas McCrae, a carpenter and farmer, a small plot of land near Ash Mesa, promises of a good life, honest work, and respect. The words had seemed so sincere when she'd first read them in her cold Boston tenement, her late husband's debts still haunting her doorstep. The train lurched, and she caught her reflection in the window, pale Irish skin made paler by months of factory work, green eyes that had forgotten how to hope. At 24, she was already a widow, already worn down by the world's cruel arithmetic that counted a woman's worth in the coins men were willing to pay. Next stop, Coyote Springs. The conductor called. 30-minute water break. The train wheezed to a halt beside a ramshackle station. Eleanor watched the other passengers rise, eager to stretch their legs and escape the stifling car. She remained seated until a sharp voice cut through the murmur of voices. Miss Hartley, Eleanor Hartley. A woman in an expensive traveling dress stood in the aisle, her smile as false as paste jewelry. Mrs. Temple, the marriage broker who had arranged everything. Come now, dear, we have business to discuss. Eleanor followed reluctantly onto the platform where the desert heat slammed into her like an open oven door. Mrs. Temple led her to the shade of the station house, away from curious ears. There's been a small complication. Mrs. Temple began, producing a sheaf of papers. Additional fees for the final documentation. Territory regulations. You understand? $50. $50. Eleanor's heart plummeted. But I've already paid. The initial fee, yes, but these are government requirements. Without proper certification, your marriage won't be legal. Mrs. Temple's eyes glittered like a snake's. Of course, if you can't pay now, we can arrange a loan. The interest is quite reasonable. Eleanor stared at the papers, her mind racing. She had $12 to her name, her eating money, until she could establish herself. The trap was closing around her, as neat as any snare. I need to think. The train leaves in 20 minutes. Dear, decide quickly. Mrs. Temple's smile sharpened. Mr. McCrae is expecting you in Ash Mesa. It would be such a shame if you couldn't fulfill your agreement. There could be consequences. Eleanor walked to the edge of the platform, her thoughts churning. Through the station window, she glimpsed her own reflection again, but this time she saw her mother's face, proud even in poverty. Her mother who had crossed an ocean for freedom, only to die in a Boston slum. 10 minutes, the conductor shouted. Eleanor returned to Mrs. Temple. I'll sign nothing until I meet Mr. McCrae. The older woman's face darkened. That's not how this works. Then I'll make it work differently. Eleanor lifted her chin, finding steel she didn't know she possessed. If Mr. McCrae is the man his letters suggest, he'll understand. She boarded the train without looking back, leaving Mrs. Temple sputtering on the platform. But as the locomotive pulled away, Eleanor saw the woman sending a telegram, her movements sharp with anger. 2 days later, the train pulled into Ash Mesa as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Eleanor gathered her single carpet bag, her hands trembling despite her resolve. Through the window, she saw him tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. Jonas McCrae looked exactly like his photograph, yet somehow entirely different. There was a kindness in his eyes that no camera could capture, a quiet strength in the way he stood. She descended onto the platform, the tears she'd been holding back for miles finally spilling over. The exhaustion, the fear, the humiliation of being bartered like cattle, it all crashed down at once. Jonas stepped forward, then stopped, uncertain. He pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and offered it silently. When she didn't take it, he simply held it out, patient as stone. "Miss Hartley." She nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. "I'm Jonas. He paused, seeming to wrestle with words. "I know this isn't how either of us imagined it. Mr. McCrae, well. A man wearing a deputy's badge swaggered over, his breath sour with whiskey. "Got yourself a mail-order bride, did you? How much did this one cost? Must be nice, buying yourself a woman like she's a head of cattle." "Walk away, Sykes," Jonas said quietly, but there was iron in his voice. Deputy Sykes leered at Eleanor. "Pretty enough, I suppose. I hope you checked the teeth before you paid." Jonas moved so fast Eleanor barely saw it. Suddenly Sykes was pressed against the station wall, Jonas's forearm across his throat. "The lady deserves your respect," Jonas said, each word precise as a hammer blow. "Apologize. I can't assault an officer. I see a drunk insulting a lady. No officer in sight." Jonas pressed harder. "Apologize." Sykes wheezed out something that might have been sorry before Jonas released him. The deputy stumbled away, shooting dark looks over his shoulder. Jonas turned back to Eleanor. His face flushed. "I apologize for that. Ash Mesa isn't... It's not all like him." Eleanor finally found her voice. "The letters you sent? Did you write them all yourself?" He frowned. "Of course. Why do you..." Understanding dawned. "Mrs. Temple, what did she tell you?" "Nothing. Everything. I don't know what's true anymore." The tears came faster now. "She wants more money. Says the marriage won't be legal without it. I think I've been foolish." Jonas's jaw tightened. He offered his arm, a gesture of old-world courtesy that seemed to surprise him as much as her. "There's a boarding house run by Mrs. Maggie O'Shea. Good woman, fair prices. You can stay there while we sort this out." "I can't," Eleanor started to protest. 3 days, he said firmly. "Stay 3 days as my guest. No obligations. If after that you want to leave, I'll buy your ticket back to Boston myself. But if you decide to stay..." He met her eyes. "Then we do this proper. No brokers, no lies. Just truth between us." Eleanor studied his face, searching for deception and finding only earnestness. She took his offered arm, her tears finally slowing. As they walked through the dusty streets of Ash Mesa, past the saloon and the general store, past the tiny mission church and the blacksmith's forge, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not quite hope that would take time, but the possibility of it, like a seed waiting for rain. The boarding house was a 2-story adobe building with bright curtains in the windows. A woman with graying red hair and a face like a friendly bulldog greeted them at the door. "Jonas McCrae! You big fool," Maggie O'Shea said, hands on her hips. "This how you court a lady, bringing her to my doorstep looking like she's been crying for a week?" "It's not," Jonas began. "Hush, come in, dear," Maggie said to Eleanor, her voice gentling. "You look dead on your feet. Jonas, get gone. You can call tomorrow like a civilized person." As Jonas left, he pressed something into Eleanor's hand. His letters, the real ones, she realized, seeing his awkward handwriting instead of Mrs. Temple's flowing script. "Read them," he said simply, "then decide." That night, in a clean room with a proper bed, Eleanor read Jonas's true letters by lamplight. They were nothing like the flowery prose Mrs. Temple had improved. Instead, they were plain-spoken and honest, full of details about irrigation ditches and the best season for planting squash. He wrote about his loneliness, his hopes for a partner who could see beauty in the desert's harsh face. He mentioned his past mistakes made in uniform, debts of conscience he was still paying. One line stood out: "I don't need a servant or an ornament. I need a partner who's willing to build something from nothing, someone who understands that respect is the foundation of any home." Eleanor touched her tears with wonder. For the first time since leaving Boston, they weren't tears of despair. Outside her window, a coyote howled at the rising moon, and the desert wind whispered promises of tomorrow. She folded the letters carefully and placed them under her pillow. 3 days to decide her fate. 3 days to learn if Jonas McCrae was the man his words suggested. As sleep finally claimed her, Eleanor thought she could hear the future calling, dangerous and uncertain. But finally, genuinely, hers to choose. Eleanor woke to the scent of baking bread and the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the events of yesterday rushed back like a flash flood. She dressed quickly in her best remaining dress, a faded blue cotton that had seen better days, and ventured downstairs. The boarding house dining room buzzed with conversation. Miners, traveling salesmen, and 2 school teachers sat around a long wooden table laden with eggs, biscuits, and thick bacon. Maggie O'Shea presided over it all like a benevolent general. "Ah, there's our girl," Maggie said, guiding Eleanor to a seat. "Eat up. You'll need your strength for this town." Eleanor had barely touched her eggs when she noticed the conversation dying around her. The other diners stared with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. One of the school teachers leaned over. "You're the mail-order bride," she said, not unkindly but with obvious pity. "We heard about the scene at the station." Heat crept up Eleanor's neck. She forced herself to meet the woman's eyes. "I'm a widow seeking honest employment and a new start. Nothing more, nothing less." Maggie slapped the table. "Well said. And anyone who has a problem with that can find somewhere else to take their meals." After breakfast, Eleanor ventured into town with a letter she'd written the night before not to send, but to organize her thoughts. The post office doubled as the general store, run by a thin man with suspicious eyes who looked her up and down like she was merchandise. "Help you, miss?" "Just looking. Thank you." Eleanor pretended to examine a bolt of calico while actually studying the town through the window. Jonas's carpentry shop stood across the street, sawdust drifting from its open doors like golden snow. She watched him work, his movements sure and practiced as he shaped wood into something useful and beautiful. "That's good pine he's working," a gravelly voice said beside her. An old man in buckskins had appeared silently, his face weathered as ancient leather. "Jonas knows wood like I know water. I'm Ben, by the way. Old Coyote Ben, they call me." "Eleanor Hartley." "I know who you are." Ben's eyes twinkled. "Whole town's talking. That Temple woman's been sending telegrams all morning, trying to stir up trouble." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that comes with official-looking papers and legal threats. But don't you worry none. Jonas McCrae's got friends. And that counts for something out here." Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion erupted outside. A well-dressed man with the soft look of someone who'd never worked with his hands was addressing a gathering crowd. Beside him stood 2 hard-faced men who looked like hired muscle. "Progress, gentlemen," the soft man declared. "The railroad brings progress, and with it, prosperity. All we need is water rights to Beaver Run, and Ash Mesa will transform from a dusty way station to a thriving hub of commerce." Eleanor drifted outside with the other onlookers. Jonas had emerged from his shop, wood shavings still clinging to his shirt. "That water feeds a dozen families. Lockwood." Jonas said, "You can't just dam it up for your locomotives." Vern Lockwood smiled like a snake. "I can, and I will. Mr. McCrae, I have legal documents proving my claim predates yours. Perhaps if you spent less time importing wives and more time securing your holdings. Watch your tongue, Jonas warned. Or what, you'll assault me like you did Deputy Sykes. I heard about that unfortunate incident. Lockwood's eyes found Eleanor in the crowd. Ah, and this must be the bride in question. Tell me, Miss, are you aware that Mr. McCrae is squatting on disputed land, that any marriage you enter might leave you homeless within the month? Eleanor felt the crowd's eyes on her, waiting for her to crumble. Instead, she stepped forward, her mother's stubborn Irish blood singing in her veins. I'm aware that men like you have been making such claims since time began, she said clearly. Promise the moon to steal the stars. I've seen your type in Boston, different clothes. Same greed. Lockwood's face darkened. You should mind your betters, woman. I see no betters here, Eleanor replied. Only a man who mistakes wealth for worth. Someone in the crowd chuckled Old Coyote Ben, she realized. Then another laugh joined. And another. Lockwood's face flushed purple. We'll see about that. He snarled before stalking away, his hired men trailing behind. Jonas crossed to Eleanor, something like wonder in his eyes. That was... You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. She met his gaze steadily. If I'm to stay here, then I need to know what I'm facing. Walk with me, Jonas said suddenly. Let me show you something. They left town on foot, following a narrow trail that wound up into the red rocks. The path was steep, and Eleanor was grateful for her practical boots. Jonas walked beside her, occasionally offering a hand over rough spots but never presuming. There, he said finally, as they crested a rise. Beaver Run. Below them, a ribbon of silver cut through the harsh landscape. Cottonwoods clustered along its banks, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. A small adobe house sat on a rise above the water, with a half-built addition of fresh lumber extending from one side. My land, Jonas said simply. Bought and paid for, whatever Lockwood claims. That addition was meant to be... He stopped, color rising in his cheeks. For a family, Eleanor finished softly. I'm not trying to pressure you. I just wanted you to see what's at stake. Not just for me, but for the Delgados down the creek, and the mission that waters its gardens from the runoff. His hands clenched. Lockwood would turn it all to dust for his profits. They sat on a flat rock overlooking the water. Eleanor pulled out her unsent letter, smoothing its creases. I've been writing to my sister, she said, trying to explain this place, these circumstances, but how do I describe something I don't understand myself? What don't you understand? Why a man would send for a stranger, why he'd offer 3 days of choice when he's already paid for a sure thing. She looked at him sideways. Why he'd defend her honor to a deputy but won't press his own claim. Jonas was quiet for a long moment, watching a hawk circle overhead. My mother was a mail-order bride, he said finally. From Sweden, my father, he wasn't a kind man. Thought he'd bought himself a servant who happened to share his bed. His jaw tightened. I watched her fade like flowers in drought, promised myself I'd never, that if I ever... But you still sent for a bride. I sent for a partner, he corrected. Someone willing to build something together. The broker, Mrs. Temple, she changed my letters, made them prettier, more romantic. Said women wanted sweet words, not truth. He picked up a stone, turned it over in his hands. Maybe she was right, but I'd rather fail honestly than succeed through lies. The mission bell tolled in the distance and calling evening prayers. They walked back as the sun painted the desert in shades of copper and rose. At the boarding house door, Jonas paused. Tomorrow's Sunday. There's a church social after services. Would you... He cleared his throat. Would you allow me to escort you, let folks see we're doing this proper? Eleanor thought of the telegram forms she'd seen in Lockwood's hand, of Mrs. Temple's threats still hanging over her head. But stronger than fear was something else, a stubborn spark of possibility. "Yes," she said, "I'll go." That night, she finally wrote a letter she intended to send. Asterisk. Dear Sarah. Asterisk. I am not in the place I expected to be, in all meanings of that phrase. The man who sent for me is both exactly and nothing like his letters promised. There is trouble here of the kind that follows money and power, and I find myself caught between old traps and new chances. Asterisk. Do you remember Mother's saying, "When the devil bars the front door, God opens a window"? I think I've found my window. Sarah, it's small and high and will require some climbing, but the view, oh, the view might be worth it. Asterisk. Kiss the children for me. Tell them Aunt Nell is learning to be brave in the wild places. Asterisk, your loving sister. Asterisk, Eleanor Key. Asterisk. She sealed the letter and set it aside for posting. Outside her window, coyotes sang their ancient songs, and somewhere in the darkness, water ran over stones with the sound of promises that might yet be kept. In the morning, she would face the town's judgment, Lockwood's threats and Mrs. Temple's schemes, but tonight she allowed herself to hope that Jonas McCrae's awkward honesty might be worth more than all the pretty lies money could buy. The desert wind rattled her window panes, and Eleanor smiled. It sounded like adventure knocking. Sunday morning dawned clear and merciless, the desert sun already fierce by the time Eleanor pinned her mother's cameo to her collar. She stared at her reflection in the boarding-house mirror, seeing a stranger, a woman caught between worlds, neither the Boston widow nor the frontier wife. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Maggie entered with a bundle of blue fabric. "Thought you might borrow this," she said gruffly, shaking out a dress of fine cotton with tiny pearl buttons. "Can't have you facing down the gossips in worn calico." Eleanor's throat tightened. "I couldn't—" "Hush. It's been hanging in my wardrobe for 3 years, waiting for an occasion worth wearing it." Maggie's eyes softened. "Besides, I've got a feeling about you and Jonas. Good feelings are rare enough in this dusty corner of nowhere." The dress fit perfectly, its color bringing out the green in Eleanor's eyes. When Jonas arrived to escort her, he stopped mid-greeting, his expression unreadable. "You look—" He cleared his throat. "That is, you're very—" He gave up and offered his arm with a shy smile that transformed his weathered face. The church was a small adobe building with a wooden cross that leaned slightly eastward, as if pointing toward salvation. Half the town had gathered, their Sunday best ranging from faded satins to carefully mended wool. Conversations died as Eleanor entered on Jonas's arm. "Steady," he murmured. "They're more curious than cruel." But Eleanor had already spotted Mrs. Temple in the third pew, dressed in black bombazine and wearing a smile sharp as glass. Beside her sat Deputy Sykes, his badge polished to an aggressive shine. The service passed in a blur of hymns and prayers. Sister Amalia, a tiny Mexican nun with eyes like an eagle, delivered a sermon about truth and justice that seemed pointed directly at certain members of the congregation. Eleanor felt the weight of stares, heard the whispered speculations. After the service, tables had been set up in the churchyard for the social. Eleanor helped carry plates of food from the kitchen, grateful for something to do with her hands. She was arranging dishes when Mrs. Temple appeared at her elbow. "We need to discuss your situation," the older woman said smoothly. "Privately. Anything you have to say can be said here." Eleanor replied, not stopping her work. "Very well." Mrs. Temple produced a sheaf of papers. "These documents show you owe me $75 in fees and penalties. If you cannot pay immediately, you'll need to honor the original contract immediate marriage to Mr. McCrae, with a percentage of his earnings going to settle your debt." Eleanor's hands stilled. Around them, conversations quieted as people sensed drama unfolding. "Let me see those papers," Jonas said, appearing at Eleanor's side. Mrs. Temple clutched them tighter. These are between Miss Hartley and myself. If they concern a marriage to me, they're my business too. His voice carried the same quiet authority Eleanor had heard at the train station. Reluctantly, Mrs. Temple handed over the documents. Jonas studied them, his frown deepening. These signatures, he said slowly. Eleanor, is this your handwriting? Eleanor looked where he pointed. The signature was similar to hers, but not quite right. The E too flowery. The Y missing her characteristic loop. No, she said firmly. That's not how I sign my name. You're claiming forgery. Deputy Sykes stood, hand moving to his sidearm. That's a serious accusation, Miss. Then let's test it. Sister Amalia had joined them, her small frame radiating authority. I have the missions registry where Miss Hartley signed in for services. We can compare the signatures. Mrs. Temple's composure cracked slightly. That won't be necessary. Oh, but I think it will. Old Coyote Ben materialized from the crowd, carrying a leather portfolio. Been doing some checking at the telegraph office. Interesting thing seems Mrs. Temple here's been running this scheme in 3 territories. Got copies of complaints from Silver City and Tucson. The crowd pressed closer, sensing blood in the water. Mrs. Temple's face had gone pale beneath her powder. You can't prove anything? She hissed. I have connections. So do I, said a clear voice. Thomas Delgado stepped forward with his wife Rosa. My cousin works in the territorial capital. He's been investigating marriage fraud for months. 1 telegram from me, and investigators will be on the next train. Eleanor felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, but it was Jonas's hand on her elbow that made her tears finally spill over. Not from sadness this time, but from an overwhelming mix of relief and anger and something dangerously close to hope. I need air, she whispered. Jonas guided her away from the crowd, but not before she heard Maggie O'Shea's voice ring out. I think it's time you left Ash Mesa, Mrs. Temple, before we decide to handle this the frontier way. They walked to the abandoned mail car that served as a storage shed behind the church. It still smelled of coal smoke and distant places. Eleanor sank onto a crate, her whole body trembling. The letters, she said brokenly. Even your real ones. Some of the best parts. The parts that made me hope she added those. Didn't she? Jonas knelt before her, his calloused hands gentle as they took hers. Which parts? The lines about wanting a partner whose laughter could make the desert bloom, about building a life where respect mattered more than riches. Her tears fell freely now. Were any of the beautiful words yours? Eleanor. He waited until she met his eyes. I wrote that I needed someone strong enough to haul water in drought and brave enough to face down claim jumpers. I wrote that I wanted a woman who could see beauty in a cactus flower and wouldn't faint at the sight of a rattlesnake. Those were my words, plain ones. Maybe, but true. But the poetry... I don't know poetry, but I know this. His thumbs brushed her tears away with infinite care. I know that when you stood up to Lockwood yesterday, something in my chest cracked open like rain after drought. I know that watching you serve food today, treating everyone from the banker to the Mexican field workers with the same courtesy, made me proud to stand beside you. I know that your tears right now make me want to ride to the territorial capital and drag back a judge myself, just to see justice done. He kissed her forehead, then each cheek where the tears had traced their paths. The gestures were chaste, but somehow more intimate than any embrace. Each kiss a promise, a seal against the world's cruelties. This wasn't how I wanted to court you, he continued. You deserve moonlight serenades and store-bought chocolates, not legal battles and public scenes. Despite everything, Eleanor found herself laughing a watery, broken sound, but genuine. I've had moonlight serenades. My late husband was full of pretty words and grand gestures. Look where that led me. She squeezed his hands. Maybe I need sun-glare truth and someone who fights my battles without being asked. The church bell tolled, calling people back for the afternoon singing. Jonas helped her stand, but before they could leave the shelter of the mail car, Eleanor stopped him. "I'll stay," she said, "not because of any contract or threat, but because I choose to. 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, however long it takes to know if we can build something real. And the marriage, when I want it, when we both want it, as equals, not as buyer and bought." Jonas's smile was like sunrise over the desert, slow, warm, and full of promise. "Then we'd best get back before Maggie organizes a lynch mob for Mrs. Temple." They returned to find the social continuing without the marriage broker, who had wisely retreated to the hotel to await the next eastbound train. Deputy Sykes had slunk away as well, suddenly remembering urgent business elsewhere. As the afternoon wore on, Eleanor found herself accepted into the fabric of the town's life. Rosa Delgado taught her to make tortillas. Sister Amalia discussed books and education. Even the school teachers who had pitied her that morning now included her in their conversations about starting a lending library. The sun was setting when Jonas walked her back to the boarding house. At the door, he paused, seeming to wrestle with words. "That mail car," he said finally. "It's scheduled to be moved to the rail yard tomorrow, but I could buy it, fix it up, make it into something useful, a reading room for the kids, maybe, or a place for town meetings." Eleanor understood what he wasn't saying, that he wanted to transform the sight of her tears into something positive, something that belonged to their future rather than her past. "I'd like that," she said softly. That night, she lay in bed watching the stars through her window, feeling the earth turn beneath her toward an uncertain dawn. In the distance, a coyote howled, not mournful but wild and free. Tomorrow there would be new battles, Lockwood schemes, water rights, the challenge of building a life from scratch in an unforgiving land. But tonight, she touched her cheeks where Jonas had kissed away her tears, and for the first time since her husband's death, Eleanor Hartley believed she might survive. More than survive, she might actually live. The desert wind sang through the window frame, and she smiled into the darkness. Let it come, she thought. All of it. She was ready to stop running from her life and start building it instead. The sandstorm struck 3 days after Mrs. Temple fled town, as if nature itself had been holding its breath. Eleanor first noticed the change while helping Rosa Delgado hang laundry. The air grew thick and yellow, and the birds fell silent. "Inside, quick!" Rosa grabbed the wash basket. "This one will be bad." By the time they reached shelter, the world had turned brown. Wind howled like a living thing, driving sand through every crack and crevice. Eleanor helped Rosa stuff rags under the doors, her eyes already burning from the grit. "Jonas," she said suddenly. "He was working on the water ditches today." Rosa gripped her shoulder. "He knows the land. He'll find shelter." But Eleanor couldn't shake her worry. When the storm finally died at sunset, she was among the first outside, scanning the dusty streets. Relief flooded through her when she spotted Jonas trudging toward town, old Coyote Ben leaning heavily on his shoulder. "Found him pinned under a fallen cottonwood," Jonas explained as Eleanor and others rushed to help. "Think his leg's broken." They carried Ben to Sister Amalia's mission, where the nun examined him with practiced hands. "Clean break," she announced. "You'll heal, but you'll need watching." As she splinted Ben's leg, the old man grabbed Jonas's wrist. "Weren't no accident. That tree falling. Saw marks on the trunk. Fresh ones." Jonas's face darkened. "Lockwood." Storm covered the evidence nice and neat. Ben continued. "But I know what I saw. They're making their move on the water." Over the following days, more accidents plagued the water-dependent families. The Delgado's irrigation gate was found smashed. Jonas's new ditching was filled with rocks overnight. Sister Amalia discovered salt dumped in the mission's well, not enough to poison, but sufficient to make the water unpalatable. Eleanor threw herself into the community's defense with a fervor that surprised even her. She organized night watches, keeping careful notes of every incident. Her neat handwriting filled page after page with dates, times, and observations. "You should have been a lawyer," Maggie commented one evening, watching Eleanor work by lamplight. "Got the mind for it." "My mother wanted me to be a teacher," Eleanor replied, not looking up from her documentation. "Said education was the only thing they couldn't take away from you. Turns out she was wrong. They can take everything if you're not watching." The next morning brought a new crisis. Eleanor was helping at the general store when young Timothy Delgado burst in, eyes wide with fear. "The locusts," he gasped. "They're eating everything." The swarm descended like a biblical plague, a dark cloud that blotted out the sun. Eleanor had never seen anything like it, millions of insects devouring every green thing in their path. The town mobilized desperately, beating pans, setting smudge fires, trying to save what they could. Eleanor found herself working beside Jonas in his small vegetable garden, throwing blankets over the tomato plants she'd helped him transplant just days before. "It's no use," he said finally, watching the locusts strip a young fruit tree to bark. "They'll take it all." "Then we'll plant again," Eleanor said fiercely. "As many times as it takes." He looked at her sweaty, disheveled, covered in dust and dead insects, and something shifted in his expression. "How did I get so lucky?" he murmured. Before Eleanor could respond, a gunshot cracked across the afternoon air. Then another. They ran toward the sound, finding chaos at the Delgado farm. Lockwood's men were there with Deputy Sykes, who held a smoking pistol. "Just shooting locusts," Sykes said with a nasty grin. "Thought I saw some heading for that water barrel." The barrel lay on its side, water soaking into the thirsty ground. Tomas stood rigid with fury, while Rosa held him back. "That was our drinking water for the week," Rosa said, her voice deadly quiet. "File a complaint," Lockwood suggested, appearing from behind his hired men. "Oh wait, Deputy Sykes handles those, doesn't he?" He surveyed the locust damage with satisfaction. "Seems nature itself wants you people gone. I'm prepared to make generous offers for your land today only. Tomorrow. Who knows, the price might drop." "Get off my property," Thomas growled. "Public right-of-way," Lockwood countered. "The future railroad easement runs right through here. Didn't you know?" Eleanor felt rage building in her chest like steam in a kettle. These people had welcomed her, supported her, stood by her against Mrs. Temple. She couldn't stand by while they were destroyed. "Actually," she said, stepping forward, "I believe you're mistaken about that easement." All eyes turned to her. Lockwood's expression grew amused. What would a woman know about legal surveys? This woman knows how to read. Eleanor replied coolly, "And I spent yesterday at the land office, reviewing the public records. The proposed easement runs a quarter-mile south. You're trespassing." "You lying little." "Careful," Jonas warned, moving to Eleanor's side. "The lady's telling the truth. I surveyed that route myself 2 years ago for the Territorial Commission." Lockwood's face mottled with rage. "This isn't over. When the railroad comes through, when the federal marshals arrive to enforce legal water rights, then we'll be ready." Eleanor interrupted. "With documentation of every sabotaged ditch, every destroyed crop, every accident that's befallen this community since you arrived." She pulled out her notebook, pages fluttering in the wind. Names, dates, witnesses, all here. That won't hold up in court. Perhaps not, but it makes interesting reading. I'm sure the territorial newspapers would love a story about railroad corruption and intimidation of honest farmers. Eleanor smiled sweetly. "Shall I test that theory?" For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Lockwood jerked his head at his men. "Move out. We're done here for now." After they left, the community gathered in shocked silence. The locusts had moved on, leaving devastation in their wake. Gardens were stripped bare, fruit trees skeletal. Months of work destroyed in hours. "What do we do now?" someone asked. Eleanor looked at the faces around her, Mexican, Anglo, Native, all united by shared loss and common purpose. "We do what people have always done," she said. "We help each other. We share what we have. We replant. We survive." "The girl's right," Sister Amalia declared. "The mission has seed stores. Not much, but enough to start." "I've got preserves put by," Maggie added, "and flour enough to share." One by one, others spoke up. Tools that could be loaned, knowledge that could be shared, labor that could be traded. It wasn't much against the devastation, but it was something. That evening, Eleanor sat with Jonas on the steps of the mission, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of rose and gold. His hand had been bandaged cut while trying to save his plants, and she held it carefully in both of hers. "You were magnificent today," he said quietly. "The way you stood up to Lockwood, the way you rallied everyone after." "I was terrified," Eleanor admitted. "But I was more angry than scared. How dare he? How dare any of them think they can just take what others have built?" Jonas squeezed her hand. "That's why I need you to learn something." He hesitated, then continued. "Ben taught me to shoot when I first came here. Said a man who couldn't defend his water couldn't keep it. I think you should know how to handle a gun, too." Eleanor considered this. Back in Boston, ladies didn't touch firearms. But she wasn't in Boston anymore. And she was beginning to understand that being a lady out here meant something different, something harder and more honest. "All right," she said. "Teach me." "Tomorrow, after we start replanting." He raised their joined hands and kissed her knuckles. "Thank you for staying, for fighting, for being you." The stars were coming out, bright and fierce in the clear desert air, somewhere in the darkness. A coyote called not the lonely sound she'd once thought it, but a declaration of survival against all odds. "We're going to win," Eleanor said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "It won't be easy or quick, but we're going to win." "How can you be sure?" She thought of her mother, crossing an ocean with nothing but hope, of herself, boarding a train with nothing but desperation, of this community, rebuilding after locusts with nothing but determination. "Because we have to," she said simply, "because the alternative is letting them win, and that's not acceptable." Jonas pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence as the desert night wrapped around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, empty fields to replant, wells to guard, battles to fight. But tonight, Eleanor felt the solid strength of the man beside her and the deeper strength of the community around her, and knew she'd found something worth fighting for. In the mission behind them, candles flickered as Sister Amelia led evening prayers. The words drifted out on the cooling air, pleas for rain, for justice, for the strength to endure. Eleanor added her own silent prayer for the courage to become the woman this land needed her to be. Then she rose, pulled Jonas to his feet, and went to join the others planning tomorrow's work. There would be time for rest when the battle was won. Tonight, there was too much to do. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning when Eleanor was sorting mail at the general store. She'd taken to helping Mr. Henderson with the post, her neat handwriting and attention to detail making her invaluable. That's when she noticed a letter from the territory capital addressed to Mrs. Temple, forwarded from the hotel. "Return to sender," Henderson said, reaching for it. "That woman's long gone." "Wait." Eleanor studied the envelope. Something about the official seal nagged at her. "May I?" Henderson shrugged. "Don't see why not. She left owing money all over town." Eleanor carefully opened the letter, her eyes widening as she read. It was a certificate of business registration for Temple Matrimonial Services, dated 3 months after Mrs. Temple had started collecting fees from desperate women. She wasn't even licensed when she took my money. Eleanor breathed. Then, louder. Mr. Henderson, do you have the territorial law books? 2 hours later, Eleanor burst into Jonas's workshop, clutching a stack of papers. I found it. The contract she made me sign, it's not just voidable, it's criminal fraud. Jonas set down his plane, wood shavings curling around his feet. Slow down. What did you find? Eleanor spread the documents on his workbench. Look, territorial law requires matrimonial agencies to be registered before collecting any fees. Mrs. Temple wasn't registered until 3 months after she started operating. Every contract she made before that is null and void, and she's liable for criminal prosecution. That's wonderful, but she's gone. No, listen. Eleanor's eyes shone with excitement. Deputy Sykes witnessed my contract. His signature is right here. If he witnessed a fraudulent document knowing it was illegal, he's complicit. And if we can prove Sykes is corrupt in this. Jonas caught on immediately. Then everything else he's testified to becomes suspect, including Lockwood's water claims. They stared at each other, the magnitude of the discovery sinking in. Then Jonas whooped, lifting Eleanor off her feet and spinning her around. She laughed, breathless and giddy, until he set her down and they stood close, his hands still on her waist. You brilliant, brilliant woman, he murmured. The workshop door banged open. Jonas, Miss Eleanor. It was Timothy Delgado, gasping for breath. Come quick, the circuit judge. He's here at the courthouse right now. Judge Harrison Blackwood, no relation to Vern Lockwood, as he pointedly clarified, was a thin man with sharp eyes and a reputation for intolerance of corruption. He'd arrived 2 days early for his scheduled session, catching everyone off guard, including Deputy Sykes, who was notably absent from the courtroom. Eleanor presented her findings with the clarity of a seasoned lawyer. The judge listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions that she answered with confidence. Jonas, the Delgados, Sister Amalia, and half the town packed the small courtroom, hanging on every word. This is quite serious, Judge Blackwood said finally. You're alleging systematic fraud by a licensed business. Unlicensed at the time. Your Honor, Eleanor corrected politely. Yes, quite. And you're further suggesting this connects to larger issues of corruption in this jurisdiction. I am, Your Honor. I believe if you examine the pattern of Deputy Sykes' involvement. The door crashed open. Lockwood strode in with 2 lawyers in city suits, Sykes trailing behind, looking pale. Your Honor, one lawyer began smoothly. I'm Chester Morrison, representing Mr. Vern Lockwood and the Mountain Pacific Railroad Company. We object to these proceedings. This woman has no standing. She's a victim of fraud, presenting evidence. Judge Blackwood cut him off. That gives her standing. Continue, Miss Hartley. Eleanor's mouth went dry, but she pressed on. She presented telegram receipts showing misses. Temple and Sykes had communicated about packages arriving, clearly meaning women. She showed how Sykes had threatened and intimidated anyone who questioned the marriage broker's methods. Then, her trump card. A letter from Maggie O'Shea's cousin in Silver City, describing an identical scheme run by the same players. Hearsay, Morrison objected. I'll determine what's admissible in my court, Judge Blackwood said coldly. Deputy Sykes, approach the bench. Sykes moved forward reluctantly. The judge fixed him with a stare that could strip paint. Did you witness contracts for Temple Matrimonial Services? Yes, Your Honor. Were you aware the business was unlicensed? Sykes glanced desperately at Lockwood. I might have, that is, I assumed. Yes or no, Deputy? A long pause, then barely audible yes. The courtroom erupted. Judge Blackwood gavelled for order. Deputy Sykes, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud. Bailiff. Wait, Lockwood stepped forward. Your Honor, Surely we can discuss this reasonably. Deputy Sykes was merely trying to facilitate commerce. By enabling fraud, the judge's voice could have frozen hell. Mr. Lockwood, I'm beginning to wonder about your interest in this matter. Eleanor seized the moment. Your Honor, I believe Mr. Lockwood's interest relates to his attempts to acquire water rights through similarly dubious means. Objection, Morrison shouted. That's outside the scope. Is it? Eleanor pulled out her notebook. Deputy Sykes has been the primary witness for Mr. Lockwood's water claims. If his credibility is compromised. Judge Blackwood leaned back, a slight smile playing on his lips. Miss Hartley, have you considered a career in law? I'm considering many things, Your Honor. Indeed. He turned to Lockwood. I'm ordering a full review of all water rights claims filed in the past year. Any documentation bearing Deputy Sykes' witness signature is hereby suspended pending investigation. Lockwood's face went from red to purple. You can't. I can and I have. Furthermore, I'm appointing a special investigator to examine the broader pattern of potential corruption. Miss Hartley, would you be willing to provide your documentation to the investigator? Gladly, Your Honor. The hearing continued for another hour, but the outcome was clear. By the time Judge Blackwood gavelled the session closed, Sykes was in custody. Lockwood's water claims were frozen, and Mrs. Temple had federal warrants issued for her arrest. Outside the courthouse, the town celebrated. Eleanor found herself passed from embrace to embrace Rosa Delgado, kissing both her cheeks. Maggie O'Shea crushing her in a hug. Old Coyote Ben saluting her with his crutch. You did it, girl, Ben crowed. Took him down with paper and ink instead of bullets. But Eleanor's eyes searched for Jonas. She found him standing apart, his expression unreadable. Her heart sank. Had she overstepped, been too forward, too unladylike in her pursuit of justice? She approached him hesitantly. Jonas, did I do wrong? He turned to her, and she saw his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Do wrong, Eleanor. You just saved this whole town. You stood in that courtroom like an avenging angel and spoke truth to power. I have never been more proud or more terrified. Terrified? That I'm not good enough for you. That you'll realize you could be anything, a lawyer, a teacher, a crusader for justice, and you'll leave this dusty little town and the carpenter who loves... He stopped, color flooding his face. Eleanor's heart raced. Who loves what? Jonas took her hands, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. Who loves you? I know it's too soon. I know you deserve courtship and time and... Eleanor stopped his words the only way she could think of, by rising on her toes and kissing him. It was brief, just a press of lips, but it silenced the celebrating crowd and made Jonas go still as stone. I choose this dusty little town, she said firmly. I choose the fight for water rights and justice. I choose the man who gave me 3 days to decide my own fate and stood by me ever since. She smiled up at him. Unless you object. Jonas answered by kissing her properly this time, there in front of God and everybody, while the crowd cheered and someone, probably Maggie, whistled appreciatively. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sister Amalia cleared her throat. Perhaps we should discuss wedding plans. When I'm ready, Eleanor said, not taking her eyes from Jonas's face. When we're ready. There's still work to do. Lockwood won't give up easily, and the town needs organizing for the legal battles ahead. A long engagement, then. Jonas agreed, though his smile suggested he'd marry her that minute if she asked. Whatever you want. That evening, as Eleanor helped Sister Amalia organize the mission's legal documents, they discovered more evidence of Lockwood's schemes in old donation records. She reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. From desperate widow to mail-order bride to, what advocate, activist, fighter for justice? You're thinking too hard. Sister Amalia observed, God doesn't always reveal his plan all at once. I came here to hide, Eleanor admitted. to disappear into a role someone else defined for me. Instead, you found yourself, the nun smiled. And perhaps that was God's plan all along. Through the window, Eleanor could see Jonas working with Thomas and others, reinforcing the water gates against any retaliation. The sight of him steady, strong, principled made her heart lift. She'd won a victory today, but the war for Ash Mesa's soul was far from over. Lockwood would regroup, find new angles of attack. The railroad would still come, bringing progress and peril in equal measure. The desert would still test them with drought and storm and locust. But Eleanor Hartley, mail-order bride turned champion of justice, was no longer afraid. She had work worth doing, people worth fighting for, and a man worth loving. The rest, as Sister Amalia said, would reveal itself in time. For now, it was enough to be here, useful and wanted, with ink-stained fingers and justice in her heart, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. The night was moonless when Eleanor heard the first explosion. She jolted awake in her room at the boarding house, heart pounding. Through her window, an orange glow flickered against the desert darkness. Shouts erupted in the street below. "Fire at the dam!" someone yelled. Eleanor threw on her wrapper and boots. Racing downstairs, Maggie was already in the hallway, shotgun in hand. "Stay here," the older woman ordered. "This is men's work." "No." Eleanor pushed past her. "This is everyone's work." The temporary dam Jonas and the others had built to protect their water supply was ablaze, black smoke billowing into the star-filled sky. But it wasn't the fire that made Eleanor's blood run cold. It was the sight of more flames blooming along Beaver Run, following the creek's path like deadly flowers. "They're trying to destroy the whole water system," Tomas shouted, "arriving with buckets." Eleanor's mind raced. Multiple fires meant multiple attackers. Coordinated assault. This was Lockwood's desperate retaliation for his courtroom defeat. "Bucket Brigade." Jonas appeared through the smoke, his face streaked with soot. "Women and children to the wellmen. We need to—" A gunshot cracked through the chaos. Then another. Dark figures moved beyond the firelight Lockwood's hired guns, keeping the townspeople from fighting the flames. "Take cover," Jonas yelled, pulling Eleanor behind an overturned wagon. "We need to split up," Eleanor said urgently. "They want us focused on the main dam while they destroy everything else." Jonas looked at her, something fierce and proud in his eyes. "What do you propose?" "Give me Ben, Sister Amelia, and 3 others. We'll go upstream, try to stop whatever they're doing at the source." She gripped his arm. "You organize the defense here, make noise, draw their attention." "Eleanor, it's too dangerous. Everything we've built is in danger." She softened her voice. "Trust me, please." He kissed her hard, fast. "Be careful." Eleanor gathered her small team, old Coyote Ben still limping but determined, Sister Amelia surprisingly fierce with a rifle, young Timothy Delgado, and 2 miners who joined their cause. They slipped away from the main chaos, following deer paths Ben knew by heart. The further upstream they went, the clearer Lockwood's plan became. Small charges had been set along the creek bank, designed to collapse the channel and divert water away from the town's irrigation systems. "Clever," Ben muttered, examining one unexploded charge. "Blow the right spots. Water finds a new path. Might take weeks to repair." "Can you disarm them?" Eleanor asked. "Maybe, if they ain't set to timers." He squinted at the device. "Need light, sister. You still carry that blessed candle." Sister Amelia produced a stub of beeswax candle by its flickering light. Ben worked with steady hands despite his injury. One by one, they found and disarmed 5 charges. Then Eleanor herded horses approaching fast. "Hide," she hissed. They scattered into the brush just as 3 riders appeared. Eleanor's heart sank. Lockwood himself led them, his city clothes replaced by dark riding gear. Check the charges, he ordered. They should have blown by now. One of his men dismounted, examining Ben's handiwork. Someone's been here. Boss, charges are disarmed. Lockwood cursed viciously. Find them. They can't have gone far. Eleanor pressed herself flat against the sandy soil, hardly daring to breathe. Beside her, Timothy trembled. She found his hand and squeezed it reassuringly. The searchers came closer. Closer. A boot stepped inches from Eleanor's hidden face. A shot rang out from across the creek. Then another. Jonas's voice boomed through the darkness. Lockwood, face me like a man instead of skulking in the shadows. The hired gun spun toward the new threat. In the confusion, Ben struck. Despite his broken leg, he rose like an avenging spirit and cracked his crutch across one gunman's skull. Sister Amelia emerged from cover, rifle trained on Lockwood. Nobody move, the nun commanded with surprising authority. But Lockwood was already moving, drawing a hidden derringer. Eleanor saw it happening as if in slow motion, the gun swinging toward Sister Amelia. The nun's eyes widening. No time. Eleanor launched herself at Lockwood's knees. They went down hard, rolling in the sandy soil. The derringer fired wild, the bullet whining off into darkness. Eleanor fought with desperate fury, using every dirty trick her brothers had taught her in childhood, elbow to throat, knee to ribs, handful of sand in the eyes. Lockwood was stronger, but Eleanor was fighting for more than her life. She was fighting for her town, her future, her newfound family. When he got his hands around her throat, she remembered Jonas's shooting lessons and grabbed for the backup pistol in her boot. The cold metal pressed against Lockwood's ribs stopped him cold. I don't want to shoot you, Eleanor gasped. But I will. You haven't got the nerve. Eleanor shifted the gun and fired into the ground beside his head. The noise was deafening. Lockwood went rigid with shock. The next one goes in your shoulder, she said calmly. Then your knee. I'll keep you alive but ruin you inch by inch, the way you tried to ruin us. Eleanor Jonas crashed through the brush, followed by armed townsmen. He took in the scene, Eleanor straddling the railroad boss, gun steady in her small hand, and his face went through several expressions before settling on grim satisfaction. Nice work, darling. With Lockwood and his surviving men secured, they returned to town to find the fires controlled, but not without cost. Part of the temporary dam was destroyed, 2 storage sheds lost, and acres of replanted fields were ash. But as dawn broke over Ash Mesa, revealing the full extent of the damage, Eleanor saw something that made her throat tight with emotion. The whole town had turned out not just to fight fires, but to rebuild. Women and men, Mexican and Anglo, young and old, all working side by side. We'll need to dig new channels, Jonas was saying, sketching in the dirt. Reinforce here and here. I can help with that, said a new voice. Everyone turned. 3 men in federal badges stood at the edge of the crowd, their leader tipping his hat politely. Marshal Tom Brennan. Judge Blackwood sent us when he heard about potential retaliation. His eyes found Lockwood, tied and under guard. Looks like we're just in time for the cleanup. The federal investigation that followed was thorough and damning. Lockwood's scheme ran deeper than anyone imagined: bribery, intimidation, forged documents going back years. Eleanor's meticulous records proved invaluable, earning her official commendation from the territorial governor himself. 2 weeks later, as the town gathered to celebrate the restored water system, Jonas found Eleanor sitting alone by Beaver Run, watching the water flow clear and strong. Penny for your thoughts, she smiled without looking at him. Thinking about water, how it always finds a way, no matter what barriers you put up. Like certain stubborn women I know. Eleanor laughed. Was that a proposal, Jonas McCrae? Would you say yes if it was? She turned to face him fully. His face was still bruised from the fight, his hands bandaged from rebuilding, but his eyes held that steady warmth she'd come to depend on. Ask me and find out. Jonas dropped to one knee right there in the mud. Eleanor Hartley, you've turned my life upside down in the best possible way. You've fought for this town, for justice, for us. Will you marry me? Not because of any contract or obligation, but because I love you and can't imagine facing another drought or flood or plague of locusts without you beside me. Eleanor felt tears on her cheeks, joy this time, pure and uncomplicated. Yes, yes, of course, yes. He slipped a simple silver band on her finger, handmade. She realized, recognizing his craftsmanship in the delicate engraving of water lilies. When? He asked, rising to pull her close. Soon, she said against his chest. But first, I have a letter to write. That evening, Eleanor penned her final report to the federal marshal's office, detailing the last of Lockwood's crimes. Then she wrote another letter. Asterisk. Dear Sarah, I'm getting married. Properly this time, for love and partnership and all the right reasons. The West has made me stronger than I knew I could be. I've fought battles with law books and pistols, helped build a community worth protecting, and found a man who sees me as an equal, not a possession. Asterisk. Remember when we were girls and played at being knights and dragons? It turns out the real dragons wear city suits and carry legal documents, but they can be beaten. Sarah, with courage and community and sheer stubborn refusal to surrender. Asterisk, kiss the children. Tell them Aunt Nell has found her castle after all built of adobe and held together with honest work and love. Asterisk, your triumphant sister. Asterisk, Eleanor asterisk. She sealed the letter and set it aside. Tomorrow there would be wedding plans and water schedules and the endless work of building a life in an unforgiving land. But tonight, she sat with Jonas on the porch of the boarding house, watching the stars emerge over the desert, their hands entwined. The night was peaceful. Beaver Run murmuring its ancient song, the town settling into well-earned rest. No regrets, Jonas asked softly. None, Eleanor said, and meant it. This is home. In the distance, a coyote called wild and free and absolutely where it belonged. Eleanor smiled and squeezed Jonas's hand, already planning tomorrow's battles, tomorrow's victories, tomorrow's life together in this harsh and beautiful land that had taught her to fight for what mattered most. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of brilliant blue sky that made the desert look like paradise. Eleanor stood before the mirror in Maggie's best room, wearing her mother's wedding dress carefully altered by Rosa Delgado's skilled hands to fit properly. Hold still, Maggie commanded, pinning orange blossoms from the mission garden into Eleanor's hair. Lord knows how Jonas managed to keep that citrus tree alive long enough to bloom. He's stubborn, Eleanor said, smiling at the memory of Jonas tenderly watering that single tree every evening. Determined it would flower for their wedding. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sister Amelia entered, carrying a small wooden box. Something old, she said, producing Eleanor's worn wedding veil from her first marriage. Eleanor's breath caught. She'd thought it lost in all the chaos. I saved it that day you arrived, the nun explained. Thought you might want it someday, not for sorrow, but transformed into joy. Rosa appeared next, holding up delicate earrings of local turquoise. Something blue, from all the women of Ash Mesa. Something borrowed, Maggie added, clasping a gold locket around Eleanor's neck. Was my mother's. Wore it to my own wedding 30 years past. And something new, Eleanor asked, touched beyond words. Waiting at the altar, Sister Amelia said with a mysterious smile. The mission bells began to ring, their bronze voices carrying across the desert. Eleanor took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and stepped out into the morning light. The whole town had turned out. The mission courtyard overflowed with people miners still dusty from their shifts, farmers in their best clothes, children scrubbed and fidgeting. Garlands of desert wildflowers and sage decorated every surface. their spicy sweetness perfuming the air. But Eleanor only had eyes for Jonas. He stood at the makeshift altar in a new suit, his something new. She realized, probably the first store-bought clothes he'd owned in years. His face when he saw her was worth every mile of dusty railroad, every tear, every battle fought. Old Coyote Ben, fully healed and serving as Jonas's best man, whispered something that made Jonas grin. Then the music started, not organ music, but Thomas on guitar and his nephew on violin, playing a melody that blended Mexican and Irish traditions into something uniquely theirs. Eleanor walked alone down the aisle, giving herself away, claiming her own future. When she reached Jonas, he took her hands with infinite tenderness. "Dearly beloved," Sister Amelia began, her voice carrying clearly. "We gather in the sight of God in this community to witness something precious, not just the union of two people, but the binding together of hopes, the joining of strengths, the multiplying of courage." The ceremony was simple but profound. When it came time for vows, Jonas spoke first, his voice rough with emotion. "Eleanor, you came to me as a stranger seeking shelter and became my salvation. You've shown me that real strength isn't in standing alone, but in standing together. I promise to be your partner in all things, in drought and plenty, in conflict and peace, in laughter and tears. I promise to respect your mind, cherish your spirit, and support your dreams as if they were my own, because they are my own now. Your battles are my battles, your joys my joys, from this day until my last." Eleanor had to swallow twice before she could speak. "Jonas, you offered me freedom when I expected captivity, respect when I anticipated servitude. You gave me 3 days to choose my life and then stood by me as I chose to fight for our community. I promise to be your true partner, to build with you, dream with you, face whatever comes with you. I promise to tend our home as I've learned to tend the desert with patience, determination, and faith that beauty can bloom anywhere if love waters it daily." When Sister Amelia pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in the next county. Jonas kissed Eleanor with a tenderness that made several of the older women dab at their eyes. The celebration that followed was like nothing Eleanor had experienced. Long tables groaned under the weight of everyone's contributions, tamales from the Mexican families, venison from the hunters, precious sugar cookies from the miners' wives, cornbread and beans, and a wedding cake that Maggie had somehow produced despite the recent shortages. "Speech," someone called out. "Let's hear from the bride." Eleanor stood, raising her glass of precious lemonade. The crowd quieted. "When I stepped off that train," she began, "I thought I was at the end of my story, a conclusion written by desperation and other people's greed." She looked around at the faces, brown and white, young and old. All turned toward her with affection. "But you taught me I was wrong. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. Together, we've fought for water, for justice, for the right to build lives of dignity and purpose." She found Jonas's hand under the table. "They call women like me mail-order brides, as if we're items from a catalog, delivered for convenience. But I learned something here in Ash Mesa. We're not merchandise. We're pioneers. We're builders. We're partners in the great work of making civilization from wilderness, not by taming the land, but by learning to live with it respectfully." Her voice grew stronger. "So, here's to all of us, the bought and the sellers who discovered they couldn't buy what matters, the powerful who learned that true strength comes from community, and the weak who found out we're stronger than anyone imagined. Here's to Ash Mesa, to justice, and to love that's earned, not purchased." The toast that followed shook the rafters. Then the dancing began, wild mixtures of traditions. Square dances morphing into Mexican folk dances, Irish jigs accompanied by Indian drums. Jonas and Eleanor led off, his carpentry-strong arms guiding her through the steps. "Where did you learn to dance?" Eleanor asked. Surprised by his grace, "Ben taught me." Jonas admitted. Said a man who couldn't dance would make a poor husband. Spent the last 2 weeks stepping on his feet, his good one. Thankfully. Eleanor laughed, the sound bright as water in the desert. They spun and swayed while the sun tracked across the sky, pausing only when Sister Amelia announced it was time to bless the union properly. The crowd followed them to Jonas's, now their homestead. The half-built addition had been miraculously completed in the 2 weeks since Lockwood's defeat, the entire town pitching in as a wedding gift. New rooms stretched out from the original adobe, fresh-cut pine gleaming gold in the afternoon light. "It's beautiful," Eleanor breathed. "Wait until you see inside," Rosa said, barely containing her excitement. The women had worked miracles. Curtains at every window, rag rugs on the floors, a proper iron stove that must have cost the community dearly. The bedroom, Eleanor blushed to think of it as theirs, held a carved wooden bed frame that was clearly Jonas's handiwork, dressed with quilts pieced together from fabric donated by every family in town. "The blue is from my old dress," one woman pointed out. "The red from Rosa's fiesta skirt. That yellow was Sister Amelia's from before she took vows." It was a tapestry of community, every stitch a promise of support and belonging. Eleanor couldn't stop the tears that spilled down her cheeks. As the sun set, the guests gradually departed with knowing smiles and gentle teasing. Finally, it was just Eleanor and Jonas, alone in their new home. The silence felt different from any Eleanor had known, not empty but full of possibility. "Are you happy?" Jonas asked, drawing her close before the fireplace he'd built with his own hands. "I didn't know it was possible to be this happy," Eleanor admitted. "When I left Boston, I thought I was trading one cage for another. Instead, I found freedom and love and purpose, and a man wise enough to know the difference between having a wife and being a husband." They stood together watching the fire dance, its warm light flickering across the new walls, blessing the space with the ancient comfort of hearth and home. Outside, the desert night sang its complex harmonies, coyote calls, owl hoots, the distant whisper of Beaver Run flowing steady and true. "Tomorrow we start the real work," Jonas said, "building a life, day by day. It won't always be easy." Eleanor silenced him with a kiss. "I didn't come west for easy. I came for real. And this us, this place, these people, this is the most real thing I've ever known." Later, as moonlight silvered the desert and painted patterns on their bedroom wall, Eleanor lay in her husband's arms and marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From desperate widow to mail-order bride to fighter for justice to beloved wife, not the story she'd expected, but the one she'd needed. Jonas stirred beside her. "What are you thinking?" "That I need to write more letters tomorrow, to other women trapped like I was, to tell them there's hope, that they have choices, that strength comes in unexpected forms." "My crusading bride," Jonas murmured with fond pride. "What else?" "That we need to finish planting the south field, and check the water gates, and start planning for the school the town needs." She turned in his arms. "That building a life is like building a house one board, one day, one choice at a time." "Together," Jonas added. "Together," Eleanor agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss as the desert stars wheeled overhead, ancient witnesses to new love in an old land. 1 year later, the rains came like a benediction. Eleanor stood in her garden, face tilted skyward, letting the drops wash over her sun-browned skin. The tomato plants she'd started from seeds sent by her sister in Boston grew tall beside the squash vines old Coyote Ben had taught her to cultivate. 2 worlds growing together, creating something entirely new. "You'll catch your death," Jonas called from the porch, but his voice held only fond amusement. "Let me be," Eleanor laughed. "Do you know how long I've waited for this?" The drought had tested them all. Weeks of rationing water, watching the levels in Beaver Run drop daily, praying for clouds that never came. but they'd survived together. The water-sharing system Eleanor had helped design, based on both Mexican communal traditions and modern irrigation methods, had seen them through. Now, with rain drumming on the tin roof Jonas had just installed, their cistern filling, the desert blooming in response, it felt like the land itself was celebrating. "Letter for you," Jonas said, producing an envelope from his pocket. "From Boston." Eleanor's heart skipped. She'd been writing regularly to women trapped in situations like hers had been, offering advice and alternatives to the mail-order bride schemes. Some wrote back with gratitude, others with anger, accusing her of destroying their only hope. But this one, she tore it open with trembling fingers, rain spotting the paper. Asterisk, "Dear Mrs. McCrae. Asterisk, your letters found me at my darkest hour. I was days from signing with a broker much like your Mrs. Temple when your warning arrived. Instead, I've taken a position as a school teacher in Colorado. Honest work for honest pay. I go west on my own terms, thanks to you. Asterisk, yours in sisterhood. Asterisk, Catherine Mills, asterisk." "Good news?" Jonas asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "The best kind. Another woman saved from the trap I nearly fell into." Eleanor leaned into his warmth. "Though I can't regret my own journey, considering where it led." A rider appeared through the rain, young Timothy Delgado, now 15 and serving as the town's unofficial messenger. Mrs. Eleanor, Mr. Jonas. He reined in his horse, grinning despite being soaked through. "Sister Amelia needs you at the mission. Says it's urgent but good." They found the mission in joyful chaos, at the center of it all. Old Coyote Bend stood with a young native woman, her traditional dress mixing with modern touches in a way that reminded Eleanor of her own cultural blending. "My granddaughter," Ben announced proudly. "Sarah Crowfeather. She's been back east, learning the white man's law, and now she's come home to help our people navigate what's coming." Sarah stepped forward, offering her hand in the American fashion. "Grandfather has told me much about you, Mrs. McCrae, how you use paper and law to fight those who would steal our water. I hope to learn from your methods." Eleanor clasped her hand warmly. "And I from yours. Your people knew how to live with this land long before we arrived." "Speaking of law," Sister Amelia interjected, "Sarah brings news from the capital. The territory is passing new water rights legislation, fair legislation that protects existing claims and recognizes traditional usage. Your documentation was instrumental in shaping it." "Eleanor." The implications were staggering. Legal protection for their water, for their way of life, for the diverse community they'd built. Eleanor felt Jonas's hand find hers, squeezing tight. "There's more," Sarah added. "The federal marshals arrested Mrs. Temple in Chicago. She's been running the same scheme there, but one of your letters reached the authorities. She'll face trial for fraud across 3 states. That evening, the whole town gathered for an impromptu celebration. The rain had stopped, leaving the air sweet with the scent of wet sage and creosote. In the mission courtyard, tables appeared as if by magic, laden with food that reflected their community's beautiful diversity: fry bread and tortillas, Irish stew and German pastries, all shared freely. Eleanor found herself watching Jonas across the crowded courtyard. He was deep in conversation with Tomas about new irrigation plans, his hands sketching shapes in the air, that concentrated furrow between his brows that she'd learned meant he was puzzling out a problem. "He's a good man," a voice said beside her. Maggie had appeared, as she always seemed to when wisdom was needed. "The best," Eleanor agreed. "And you're good for each other. Never seen Jonas so complete, like he was a house with the rooms closed off, and you came along and opened all the windows." Eleanor smiled. "He did the same for me. Showed me I could be more than what the world told me women should be." "Speaking of which," Maggie's eyes twinkled, When were you planning to tell him? Eleanor's hand went involuntarily to her still flat belly. How did you? Child, I've been midwifing since before you were born. I know the look, the glow. Maggie's voice gentled. Does he know? Not yet. I wanted to be sure. It's still early. Tonight, Maggie advised. Tell him tonight. Joy shared doubles, and Lord knows we've all earned some joy. As if summoned by their conversation, Jonas appeared. Dance with me. The musicians had started playing that same blend of traditions that had graced their wedding. Jonas led her into the familiar steps, but something in Eleanor's expression must have given her away. What is it? He asked. You look like you're holding the world's best secret. Eleanor glanced around. They were in the middle of a crowded dance floor, surrounded by their community, the stars beginning to emerge overhead. It wasn't the private moment she'd imagined, but somehow that felt right. This child would belong to all of them, be raised by a village that understood strength came in many forms. We're going to have a baby, she said simply. Jonas stopped dead, nearly causing a collision with the dancers behind them. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, wonder, concern before settling on pure adoration. Really? Really, come spring, if all goes well. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around while whooping loud enough to stop the music. We're having a baby, he announced to the startled crowd. The celebration that followed put even their wedding reception to shame. Advice flowed as freely as the precious whiskey. Someone produced remedies for morning sickness, plans for a cradle, promises of help when the time came. Sarah Crowfeather taught Eleanor a traditional blessing for expectant mothers. Rosa promised to sew baby clothes. Sister Amelia began planning the baptism. Later, much later, Eleanor and Jonas sat by their fireplace, the sounds of continued celebration drifting on the night air. Eleanor had changed into her nightgown, the soft cotton cool against her skin. Jonas's hand rested protectively on her belly, though there was nothing to feel yet. Are you happy? Eleanor asked, echoing his question from their wedding night. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Jonas replied, terrified, maybe, amazed, grateful beyond words. Our child will grow up in a different world than either of us knew. Eleanor mused. A place where water is shared fairly, where different peoples work together, where women can be more than property, where mail-order brides become community leaders. Jonas added with a smile, where carpenters marry crusaders for justice, where love builds stronger than any law or contract. Through the window, Eleanor could see lights still glowing in town, their home, their future. The letter she'd write tomorrow to Sarah in Boston would be different from all the others. Not a warning or advice, but pure celebration. Asterisk, dear sister. Asterisk. Remember how we used to play at being pioneers, making homes from blankets and chairs? I'm living that game now. Only the stakes are real and the rewards beyond imagining. I'm sending you seeds from my garden, part Boston, part New Mexico. Entirely ours. Plant them and think of me. Growing life in the desert. Water flowing where they said it couldn't. Love blooming where they said it wouldn't. Asterisk, your pioneering sister. Asterisk, Eleanor, asterisk. The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney like prayers. Outside, a spring rain began to fall again, gentle and steady. Eleanor closed her eyes, listening to the symphony rain on the roof, fire in the hearth, her husband's breathing, and somewhere deep within, the quiet miracle of new life beginning. Love isn't bought or sold, she said softly, remembering the words she'd spoken months ago. It's built like houses, tended like water, grown like gardens, and fought for. Jonas added, when necessary. Always fought for. Eleanor agreed. They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other across miles and misunderstandings. through fraud and fire, drought and plenty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges it always did in this harsh, beautiful land. But tonight, with the rain blessing the desert and love warming their home, Eleanor McCrae knew she had found something worth every tear, every battle, every mile of dusty railroad track. She was home, they were home, and in the spring, their family would grow, roots deepening in the desert soil, branches reaching toward a future they were building together, one choice, one day, one drops of precious water at a time. The desert sang its ancient lullaby, and Eleanor smiled, her hand covering Jonas's on her belly, feeling the future pulse beneath their joined fingers like a river running strong and true, carrying their love forward into tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Eleanor and Jonas's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Where are you listening from? Please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with fellow Western romance fans around the world if you enjoyed this tale of courage, justice, and love blooming in the desert. Please subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories that celebrate the untamed spirit of the frontier. Hit that like button if Eleanor's transformation from mail-order bride to champion of justice inspired you. And please click the hype button to help more listeners discover this story. Until our next adventure under the western stars, keep riding toward your dreams, yeehaw.